It's 16 minutes after the hour, May 1st, 2023. Happy May Day. This is the Civic Union, a collaboration between Access Humboldt and the Department of Communication Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, uniting the people of the county with their representative government and community helpers. We want to hear from you. Drop us an email to thecivicunion@gmail.com. You can also tweet us right now at civic_union on Twitter. We will read and respond to appropriate tweets and emails on the air. Why not give it a try? That's at Civic Union on Twitter or the Civic Union, all one word, at gmail.com. Today we're talking to Juan Cervantes. He's the Humboldt County Clerk and Recorder. Juan, welcome to the Civic Union. Thanks for making the trip to the studio today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. I am sorry that I kept you waiting. It took me about 15 minutes to get down here today. But we were just talking before we went on the air about how you were a student at Cal Poly Humboldt, and you were working a little bit with the union when you started running for the election. And I kind of remembered that period of time. That was right when I was getting started there with the union. I was wondering, just as kind of a lead in, if you would talk just a little bit about like that work and what that was like.
So it wasn't work. I was so I attended Humboldt State University at the time, known as Cal Poly Humboldt.
Yeah.
I did my undergraduate there, and I got a degree in philosophy, but an education in public service. I ran for student body president early on in my time there. And so a lot of the work that I did was advocacy work for students. And one of our biggest allies was the faculty and the faculty association. The idea was to run the associated students not like a club that promotes school spirit, but rather like a student union that represents students on different councils and committees. And so through that work, I got to really collaborate with the CFA a lot and to really appreciate the work that they do.
It's a big job there at that campus. It's a big campus. The Associated Students is responsible for a whole lot of different things. Did you know exactly what you were signing up for when you got involved?
I had an idea. I in my community college, I was the AS president as well, student trustee. And so I'd been involved in this kind of work before getting to Humboldt State University, Cal Poly now. But it's a whole other level with new political dynamics and whole different component of ed code that's responsible for it. One of the wonderful things about the California ed code is that there's a carve out for student representation and shared governance, which is a key component towards education in California. You don't see that in other states. So
it's really kind of unique in a lot of ways, the way that the institution of higher ed is set up here. And, as far as what that means for the students that are governing it, it can ask a lot of them. It can put a lot on them. It can put a lot on other people. One of the questions we like to ask folks when we get started, it's kind of a random one. Do you have a first political memory? And if so, what is it? I always tell people that for me, it was seeing George H.W. Bush take the oath of office there. And, I was born in 80. So that would have been around the time I was starting to be aware of politics and stuff. And I just remember looking at that and being like, that guy was president, and now that person is president. And that was the first time politics really registered to me. Do you have kind of a similar memory yourself?
I've got a couple. It's tough. There's so I'm the child of immigrants. My dad came over with the Bracero program from Mexico. He marched with Chavez, and so there was that kind of in the background, but it wasn't really my political awakening. Mine came along a little later. As much as that instilled really solid union values and advocacy values, it wasn't until community college. I was working at the time, typical non-traditional student that has a day job and then goes to school in the evenings, trying to be more than what I was at the time. And in the course catalog, the course catalog was explained to me as this contract between you and the university. They have promises, you have promises. As long as you both meet those promises, you walk away with a degree.
Right.
One of those promises that the school made was serving full lunches or full cafeteria foods while class was in session. And that wasn't occurring. And I'd get off work, I'd be hungry, be in school, and really, it was a campus that was out in the middle of nowhere, so there was no fast food or anything nearby, no supermarkets, and
no cafes around the corner or anything like that.
Nothing. It was a food desert in the truest word. And so I complained to my history professor at the time. David Rubialis was his name. At what point he was their CFA like political liaison that advocated in the Capitol, but really, really strong union guy, really involved. I think he too marched with Chavez, but he told me to do something about it. He told me when the trustee meetings were held,
Mhm.
and he told me what public comment was,
Mhm.
and he pushed me forward. And from that point forward, I was involved. I went to public comment a couple of times. I got ignored, so
Sounds right.
I ran for student trustee. At the
Uh-huh.
time, the student trustee was a full member of the board of trustees.
Mhm.
So I had a vote and the ability to take motions and the wherewithal to do something with that. And by the time I graduated, the cafeteria offered sandwiches, prepackaged sandwiches in the evening, but they offered sandwiches.
It's better than nothing.
And so that was the first time I really had praxis, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, there's kind of a lack, an observed like opportunity there, or lacking, and then you kind of took an opportunity. Do you remember what you said for your public comment?
Oh, I don't. I think I remembered mentioning the course catalog, mentioning that it was, some that we both entered into a contract here and that it was important to uphold that and that
Yeah.
yeah, that mattered. That was important. If there were student grievances or student issues, that course catalog gets brought up in terms of what you need. So it needs
Yeah.
to go both ways.
It's kind of the first step, that public comment period. You get like what, a minute, 3 minutes maybe to make your point, and then they're like, okay, next speaker. It feels kind of pointless sometimes, but it sounds like it was kind of the first step for you in the process of just figuring out how it all works.
Yeah.
Huh, that's very cool. Where do you live, and how long have you lived there?
I live in Eureka and I've lived there for, I want to say 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
What brought you to the area?
Um, School. So I came up for Cal Poly Humboldt. Came up visiting a friend once. Loved the hiking. Loved the outdoors.
Yeah.
Got to meet one of the philosophy professors, and that brought me up.
Okay. Which professor?
It was David Heisey is
Oh, cool.
who brought me up. Yeah.
Dr. Cannon's the president of the CFA now, so he's the one that I'm kind
Yeah.
of spending quite a bit of time with. CFA, for those out there, is the California Faculty Association.
Sorry.
Right? No, I got you. I'm the lecturer rep right now, and we're currently in the process of doing our elections. So it's kind of a fun time to be talking about it. How would you describe your office that you were just elected to?
I think it's so complicated. The title has punctuation in it.
Right.
So it's the Clerk, Recorder, and Registrar of Voters. It deals with two things primarily. It manages all of your important records, birth certificates, marriage licenses. I'm the Commissioner of Marriage
Mhm.
for the County of Humboldt, so my name's on marriage licenses, vital records, and all your important real estate records. And so it's the defender of capital in Humboldt County.
Okay.
And then on the other side, I do everything that has to do with elections, everything from voter registration, candidate filing, FPPC referrals, all the way through to the big day, and recruiting and training poll workers and administering this giant event we call Election Day.
That's a big one right now, especially, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always been a big one.
It's always important.
I think the conversation's gotten a little more intense
Yeah.
of late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've spoken to mayors on this show, and we've spoken to like city council members and things. And I feel like to some level, all of these are offices that most people have at least heard of. The mayor, I say, you see on a cartoon, they've got the top hat and the sash. The city council member, I feel like I've heard about this. The clerk and the county recorder. Now, is this a job that you like set out to do, or how did you find that job? What brought you to that office?
So it came up through election. So in California, most of this type of job is paired up in the way that it is in Humboldt County, where you have the clerk recorder and the registrar of voters together.
Yeah.
There's some historical reasoning behind that. We can, that's a whole show unto itself. But I came up, and so most people in this role come up one of two ways. They come up through the clerk recorder's office doing document recording, or they come up on the election side. And I came up on the election side, participating in that process has been something that I've been doing since I was in high school. My mom, like I said, I'm a child of immigrants, so becoming a citizen was a big deal in my family.
voting is a big part of being a citizen. And so my mom really instilled in us those values. And so I was a poll worker as soon as I was eligible to be one, back when I was, I think, 16 or 17.
How'd you feel about it back then?
Honestly, it was a nice little paycheck. It was like a $80 paycheck or something, $75 paycheck at the time. And when you're in high school, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But after the first one, it kind of it sits in you how important that process is, and to see the dedication and to surround yourself with the dedication of the people that are working those polls. Poll workers they're saintly in my book. You have all these folks that work a 16-hour day. We force them to do a ton of really complicated math at the end of that long day. We give them a pittance, and we expect them to be responsible for the pinnacle of what makes us democracy.
That transition of power.
Yeah. And so being a part of that process, it became more than that $60 or $70 stipend really quickly. And to be around those folks and be influenced by them kind of led me down to this trajectory.
What was the path like between there? So after you worked at the polls, did you get involved in party politics ever? Or has it always just been kind of within the institutions that run the machines?
So mostly the institutions that run the process. I never really got involved with any of the major parties. Worked in advocacy, generally speaking, whether it's student advocacy, and then eventually I joined the county and was working as an eligibility worker, getting people CalFresh and Medi-Cal. I saw an opening in elections and jumped on it because I was passionate about that work.
So it was the time that the office came up and you saw that it was open, and that was what kind of prompted you to run, was you thought that's an important position and I want to take a shot at it.
Yeah. I thought it was critical. I thought I had the qualifications for it. Yeah.
How would you describe those qualifications?
So I've got a degree, a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Got some critical thinking and writing skills. Background in advocacy work and working with communities and doing outreach. A pretty deep understanding of election code and figuring out code in general from a lot of that work that I did. One of the big things that I did in college was worked on transparency legislation with Senator McGuire's office. And so that really got me involved in the legislative process. And then I'm about a semester away from finishing my MBA at CSU San Bernardino.
Oh, cool.
And so the public administration skills are right there.
There you go. What was that transparency legislation? What's that all about? What did you do with that?
So I'm going to nerd out a little.
Yeah, do it.
So I'm a transparency nerd. I love transparency. I was just remarking to Nate that sunshine is the best disinfectant in my book. Yeah. And so I was doing a lot of work with student government, some of it tied to our university center. And there's different pieces of open meeting legislation that apply to different forms of government. Okay. Most people are familiar with the Brown Act. Some are familiar with the Gloria Romero Act. Different functions, different bodies that it covers. Okay. Both of those have pretty much kept up to date with the times. Auxiliaries, which are a subset of the CSU system, they're these little nonprofit corporations that assist the university in performing its duties. So at Cal Poly Humboldt, you'll have the Advancement Foundation. The University Center used to be one. I don't know what their status is these days. Kind of complicated and a hot topic these days, I understand. But you have these different auxiliary organizations, and they abide by the Bagley-Keene Act, I believe. And that's got references to telegraphs in it. It has not been updated.
Carrier pigeons and things.
Exactly. But what that means is that it hasn't kept up to the broader understanding of the right to the people to see their business being conducted, which is what these organizations are doing. You saw it really pop up and be a hot topic back in, I forget what year it was, but Sarah Palin was a big deal back then. Okay. She spoke at CSU San Jose. Okay. And that's where this just popped up from, is the people not having advance notice and being able to participate in that decision-making process.
It seems to be kind of at the heart of what's going on right now in terms of all the controversy in elections is
Right.
transparency. So
Yeah.
we'll touch on some of this a little bit more, I'm sure, as we go. What was campaigning like for you? So this was your first time campaigning.
Yeah.
What did you do, and were you ready for it? What was that like?
It was the longest year of my life.
Uh-huh.
I loved interacting with people, talking to folks. I was surprised by how receptive people were,
Hmm.
how many folks opened their door and had me come in and talk to their family while they were having dinner.
Hmm.
That part was incredible. I hadn't realized how welcoming Humboldt County could be in that way to a stranger knocking on their door wanting to talk to them about an office they hadn't heard about before.
Hmm.
Beyond that, just a lot of outreach, a lot of pounding pavement, going where people were at, and trying to be the sincerest form of myself as I could, in those spaces. Believe it or not, I'm a massive introvert. So going into those spaces, I'm having to adjust and realize that that this is a big part of serving in these roles, that without that process, it's difficult for government to be reactive, responsible for doing what the people want. You kind of have to be out amidst folks in order to be responsive.
What stuck with you from any of those encounters? Did anything like stand out, or any particular meeting with folks kind of leave a mark?
I think the fact that nobody knew what I was running for left a massive mark.
Mm-hmm.
It told me that and this isn't a dig at the sheriff's office, but that it's saying something about our community where people are more familiar with the sheriff's office than they are with their clerk, recorder, registrar of voters.
Yeah.
That often the sheriff's office is doing better outreach than those folks trying to get people to participate in government more.
So when you went out and, introduced yourself to people, you basically just kind of showed up at their homes, told them what the position was, asked them to vote for you. And that was a bulk of what you did campaigning. Was there reaching out to like organizations? Was there
80% of it? There was a little of that.
How do you feel fundraising for politics?
We were a small, nimble organization. Fundraising's tough.
Yeah.
My campaign manager / fiance will tell you I have a hard time asking for things. I'm all about the giving, but not so much the asking. And so often I had to have that poke. You have to ask. You have to ask them to vote for you. You have to ask them for a check.
Yep.
And so that was a little difficult. I was really fortunate to have a community that opened their checkbooks to me even when I wasn't asking for it.
Yeah. When you were getting this job, what were you looking forward to? And now that you have it, is it the same thing? Do you still look forward to the same thing every day?
I was looking forward to the opportunity to meet people where they're at and to do so, to run this office with that provided people across the county a sense of security that everything was being done right. And I'm still excited about that.
Yeah.
How we get there is a little tough. We're in a really tough budget situation in the county. And so those things get more difficult, but I'm excited for that work. I'm excited to be where we haven't been in the past.
Yeah.
We've been invited to Sovereign Days again up in Hoopa, and that's something that hadn't happened before my time here. And so, to be able to do this outreach, to register folks to vote, more importantly, to talk to them about the positions that they're eligible to run for, because that's a critical part of my platform. Is that it's a lot easier to vote and to register to vote when you know somebody that's on the ballot.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue to this next question that I've got right here, which is, what would you tell listeners out there that have no interest in local politics at all? They just don't care. What would you say to them?
I guess, and this might be a curveball for you, but that I understand that it's okay. I'm all about empowerment, enfranchisement, but it's tough. The economy's rough. It's if you're working a 60, 70-hour job in manual labor or any kind of labor, really, you got a family. It's tough to have the extra units of care at the end of the day to vote for some stuff that's going to require even more effort on your behalf to really make an informed decision. I tell them that we're working on it. This show is a big part of what's doing that work. The biggest barrier for people like that to get involved is the fact that they don't know who they're voting for, and that isn't really meaningful enfranchisement if you're being asked to make a blind decision. Shows like this, where you get to hear from the candidates and get an idea of what's going on in local politics and really understand how that impacts people's day-to-days, that's enfranchisement.
This is Dr. Aaron Donaldson from Arcata, California. You are listening to KZZH 96.7 FM Eureka. Also streaming on kzzh.accesshumboldt.net. Access Humboldt is local voices through community media. It's 6:37 on May the 1st. I hope you are having a happy May Day. This is the Civic Union, a collaboration between Access Humboldt and the Department of Communication Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt. Today, we're talking to Juan Cervantes. He's the Humboldt County Clerk and Recorder. Juan, we were just talking about kind of trying to get people in touch with local politics, trying to kind of cross that gap between, people not caring. You said it's kind of a curveball to say you understand people who don't care, but, I get it too. You talked about that open comment period where you spoke, and it's like, there's a big ask, like they're supposed to give you food. That's the contractual obligation of the school. And yet you have to make time to show up and say something. And then you said you felt ignored, and then you had to do more work. I think it's understandable, like you said, that people feel like politics asks a lot and kind of gives a little. What do you think your office in particular can do to solve that problem? Like what tools do you have? You were very gracious about the work this show does, and I appreciate it. What does your office do in that capacity?
So I'm gonna take a step back, and push back.
Okay,
because I don't think it does a little.
Oh, cool.
Like I think it takes a lot, and it has the ability to transform everything. Bureaucracy is thought of as this really, sludgy, hard, swampy thing that you get through. But it's magic. If you're able to read the right code and the right tomes and find the right grants and bring the right people together to do this work, you sign a document and a park happens. You sign a document and all of a sudden you have $25,000 to do voter outreach. And so that work that I did got me here. And there's a lot of power I have now to make the world a better place in the way that I think it could be a better place.
I appreciate that.
And so I'd push back and say that you throw everything in and you get a little back.
Yeah.
It could seem that way at times.
Yes.
And I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But you just keep pushing, you keep grinding. You don't let those trustees who ignore you win the day.
Yeah.
You come back, you get the vote, you sit next to them. That's where the transformative change. And you see that happening in Humboldt County.
What's that look like in terms of your particular office? How does that work play out?
So, and we'll be talking about this later.
Yeah.
But in one way, it's a different model for voting that's more responsive to the needs of a rural county like ours.
Right.
It's a transformative way of continuing to do the same thing in terms of process, but doing it in a way that works better for our community.
You're talking about the Voter Choice Act.
That's what I'm talking about.
We're getting that to the next segment for sure.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of particular pieces of legislation and things and policy proposals that you look for. That's pretty cool. Where is your office located geographically?
It's two offices.
Okay.
So like I said, I've got two jobs, clerk recorder and also the Registrar of Voters.
Okay.
And so my Registrar of Voters office is at 2426 6th Street in Eureka. That's kind of over by the Harley Davidson dealership.
Oh, okay.
On your way out of Eureka. And my clerk recorder office is at 825 5th Street on the 5th floor in Eureka. And so you have to take two elevators to get there. If you're taking the elevator, you take one elevator to the 4th floor and you pop around and hop into another elevator to get to the 5th.
Do you spend the same time in both offices?
It depends. I'm responsive to what's going on in the offices. Sometimes I'm in elections more. Sometimes I'm in the clerk recorder's office more.
Yeah.
It just depends on what's on my schedule.
I'm imagining a world where you answer the phone in one office and then you realize you got to go catch the phone in the other office and you're like whisk over there. Is that how that works? Or is it like Monday here, Tuesday there? How do you break that time?
We have an incredible IT department in the county. Just mind boggling. There's not many of them. them, that they're definitely understaffed and under-resourced, but they punch way above their budget in terms of the services they provide us.
Yeah.
And so they've set it up so that both of my phones ring with the same phone number.
Okay.
I'm the only one that answers my phone, so it's never going to get picked up twice. And so
Right.
if you call my phone number, it's going to ring both places.
Okay.
They have my workstation set up in a similar way.
Okay. So is the two office just kind of like a legacy left over from a bygone era, or is there like a real functional purpose for there being two totally separate locations where these
I'm a working department head, and so
Yeah.
I'm in the weeds with my folks, and so
Yeah.
I need a workstation and a place to actually get it done. And so when I'm in the clerk recorder's office, that means I need access to those bits of software in that space to have those meetings. When I'm in elections, I'm doing election work, and so yeah.
Right. It makes sense. They're very, very different kind of locations and jobs in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with the first one. You've already talked about this just a little bit in terms of what it means to be like the clerk and recorder. It's like you said that you're doing like a lot of like marriage certificates and stuff like that. Just day to day, take us through that. Like, what does that look like? Like, what does that job entail?
So I have a wonderful staff that does most of that work.
Okay.
99.9999% of that work.
Right.
And so I've got really good document examiners and senior document examiners over there.
Okay. What kind of stuff comes to you then?
Policy stuff. So right now we're in the budget, and
Right.
so the budget's life.
Okay.
You're probably gonna any department head you talk to, that's
Yeah.
kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
We're going back and forth with the CAO's office. You got 10 coins, and everybody wants 9 of them.
9.5 if possible.
Right. And so that's kind of where a lot of the work's at. That legislative work where we're on committees, advocating for different fixes or against certain fixes in terms of how certain things get done. So my function as an elected official, for the most part, is on the policy, where we're going type of level.
Okay.
Hiring has been a big part of what I've been doing these days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where are we going in that particular capacity? Like, what's the future look like?
So some of the things we're working on over there is restricted covenants. I don't know how familiar you are with those.
Vaguely.
So it used to be that, however you might feel about racism in the country today, it was definitely far more racist in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that was reflected in our recordable documents on deeds and easements and all kinds of documents where certain groups of people were purposely excluded from certain neighborhoods or certain parts of real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And the state legislatures recently come out with a piece of legislation that was signed by the governor that has called for us to redact that kind of information. And so that's a massive project. Writing looks a lot different today than it did maybe in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking massive swirly cursive that doesn't look like cursive today.
Yeah.
And so figuring out solutions for that's one of the big things we're dealing with right now. Modernization as a whole, figuring out ways to get services to folks quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
That's another process that we're going about doing towards the future. But again, a lot of change is difficult with a tight budget.
Yeah. So how's that changed then when you do the other job? Is this is it similar budget stuff, policy stuff, or is it just like different particulars, or is it like
different budget altogether? So
right.
Each office has different budgets, and so but it is a different budget. The clerk recorder's office generates enough money usually on most years in order to not require any general funds. Whereas the elections office, we're not a moneymaker. And so that conversation looks a lot different when you're not generating a lot of funds. And so it becomes a little more difficult. Advocating for more folks. And going into this new voting model, there's a lot of uncertainties that are reflected in the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kinds of preparations are you making for like upcoming elections? Anything, or is it just kind of on rails at this point?
Oh, no. There's always work. There's always work. That office is maybe in yesteryear it was the case that there was downtime, but right now we're prepping for a couple of major things. We are changing the way that candidate filing is done, and so we're shifting to one where a lot of that can be done online, and you don't have to fill out these outdated PDFs. We're getting equipment set up and training set up so that we can administer ranked choice voting in the city of Eureka.
Oh, neat.
That's a massive change.
Yeah.
real repercussions to how we
Yeah.
do our stuff.
That's significant.
It's not just the outcome that changes, but it's all the steps along the way. And we're gearing up for the Voters' Choice Act, and we want to do so in a way that has meaningful public outreach at the beginning. And so that's a big lift, all while getting ready for a massive party primary in March.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ranked choice voting is where you rank a couple of options as opposed to vote for one person.
That's correct.
Or the other. And it's just a totally different way of doing elections. That seems like a huge shift.
Yeah.
A lot of like little rules and things that would have to change that you're not even aware of. That like what goes into that kind of shift?
Knock on wood on that one. Hopefully we've become aware of it. That's what we're doing right now, is we're looking and a lot of this work is thinking about all the stuff that could go wrong before it goes wrong.
Yeah, that's kind of the game, right?
Yeah. I have a little notepad by my bed, and when I wake up at 3 a.m, you jot it down. Yeah. But there's a lot that goes into that, and on the administration perspective, I feel pretty confident in where we're going. The concerns I have are the voter side, and that's where we're always thinking is this going to enfranchise people or make it harder to vote? Is that person that's already feeling a little out of it less likely to vote in this more complicated way, or more likely to vote?
Yeah. What do you wish more people knew about your job in either capacity?
Let's see. That's a tough one. What do I wish they knew more about? That we work for them, I guess. That my job is it's like a upside down pyramid, with me at the bottom and my staff above me, and at the very top is the people. And that they shouldn't feel cautious about coming into either office and asking questions, and that our roles aren't gatekeepers, but rather facilitators, and that we're here. We might not be able to give you what you want, because it might not be legal for us to do so, but our job is to explain it to you to the best of our abilities and guide you through those processes with grace.
And how's that been going? I feel like we've been asking a lot of folks that kind of just generally the tenor of politics in general feels like it's changed. It's gotten maybe a little more urgent, perhaps a little less respectful at times. I feel like elections could be kind of ground zero for that. Have you felt any of this? Or
we do. One of the first places we go is we listen with compassion. We understand that those feelings come from somewhere. There's no such thing as an irrational emotion. Usually it's tied to something. It might not make sense to me, but there's something going on there. And so we work with folks the best we can, and getting them answers and showing them how things work and bringing them into the process. And 90% of the time that gets them there. And sometimes those become our biggest allies. And that other 10%, you just kind of have to acknowledge that that's just how they're going to feel, and there's not much we can do about it.
Has that gotten, do you think, you're kind of new to the job, but do you feel like it's gotten more intense recently, or do you feel like we're all just like the good old days always feel a little easier?
I have a hard time reminiscing like that.
Yeah, right. But it does feel different sometimes.
Yeah. But it is different. Like life is different.
That's true.
We're in a quote unquote post-COVID world. Like it's hard to compare today to 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, just because life as a whole, like the internet's changed. Society is changing so drastically that I'd hate to say, I wish we were in the 40s when fewer people were allowed to vote, but everybody was happier about it.
Yeah, it's not ideal. No, I think that just when it comes to disagreement in public, it seems we've always been a violent country, and we don't want to, sweep that under the rug. Like politics have always been very expensive, and blowback has been a fundamental part of that cost. And I feel like Trumpism in particular has just, made a lot of people perhaps more aware of that. But it's also agitated people with disinformation, in particular with regards to like elections. And it sounds like for you, a huge portion of those people can become allies in a lot of ways because they're upset about real things.
I firmly believe in the idea of inoculating people with the truth.
Yeah.
Misinformation works when there's nothing there, when there's obfuscation of what's going on in government. Misinformation functions best when you have an uninformed populace. When people know what's going on, they're more likely to think that the stuff they're being told is not true. And so, again, transparency, shows like this, interacting, showing people that there's really no distinction between the people and government, that we're a facet of of them, that we're an extension of the people, and having them realize that, having them come in, doing radio shows, having our logic and accuracy tests, or everything that we can, post it on YouTube, inviting folks in, bringing them in, all of that makes it harder for that misinformation to take hold.
I just really want to emphasize that I appreciate that there's allies across the aisle, and that if we can educate folks, we can make a difference.
Two of our, maybe not two, I'll say our biggest allies going into an election are the parties, and all of them.
Huh.
They're who their membership calls and asks about misinformation, and we have a great relationship with all of the parties in Humboldt County. I'll be on the phone with their call people, their phone people, and they'll call and say, we heard this, what's going on with this, and we tell them, and then we're like, wait, while we have you on the phone, we're also hearing this, and this, and they'll take it down, and they do good work. They I think in Humboldt County they're responsible.
I am Dr. Aaron Donaldson. This is the Civic Union. You're listening to KZZH 96.7 FM Eureka. We're also streaming on kzzh.accesshumboldt.net. Access Humboldt is local voices through community media. Today we're talking to Juan Cervantes, the Humboldt County Clerk and Recorder. Juan, one of the things that you said that you wanted to talk about here at the end, as we finished the last segment, describing how we want to kind of use information to combat misinformation. We want to move to this Voters' Choice Act here. This was one of the things that you said is kind of important. Do you want to walk us through some of the kind of key elements here of this act and why you think it's necessary?
Yeah. Let me give you the quick tagline, and then I'll talk as long as you'll let me talk about this.
We got lots of time.
So the catchphrase is more days, more ways to vote. And so the idea behind the Voters' Choice Act, I'm going to go back historically a little. It was enacted prior to vote by mail being a statewide thing. And so that was one of the big components of the Voters' Choice Act. Now that all California registered voters receive a vote by mail ballot in the mail prior to every election, that's less of a thing. The next big impact it's going to have on voting is a shift. Currently, we have polling places. In the polling place model, that's where you have your little neighborhood polling place. You can only go to your neighborhood polling place. If you go to another one, you get told to go to the one that you need to go to.
Right.
If you live in parts of the county where we don't have ADA accessible facilities or poll workers available to serve in those polling places, then you get put in a mail ballot precinct, and that means that you're not assigned any of them, and you just have to vote by mail. And that's something that occurs pretty broadly in the county. We don't have a lot of ADA accessible facilities in Humboldt County. We've found it harder and harder to get enough poll workers to volunteer for each election. Every year is harder than the past. Every election, we're just scraping by with the absolute minimum number of folks. And that other piece, the mail ballot precinct piece, that's a piece that is hard for a lot of Humboldt County to deal with. We have large sections of our community that want to vote in person, and for a lot of those mail ballot precincts folks, for all those mail ballot precinct folks, they have to drive all the way to Eureka, whether they live in Soham, Eureka, Hoopa, wherever they might be. That's difficult. They're getting a different experience than somebody living in Eureka. Some of that's unavoidable just due to the large geographic distance, but the Voters' Choice Act does a lot in combating that, in that it gives us the ability to use vote centers instead of polling places. Vote centers are going to be fewer in number than all the neighborhood polling places. Instead of having 36 polling places, we would have something around 13. But they would be open longer, and anybody anywhere in the county could go to any of them and vote. So if you live in McKinleyville, but you're working, down in Redway, you can go over to Garberville and vote there. And so that the idea is that several of about two of them are going to be open for 11 days. The rest of them are going to be open for 4 days, so you have more time to go. There'll be some weekend days that folks are going to be able to go and vote in person if that's what they want to do. They'll still have the option of voting by mail. We'll have drop boxes throughout the county. more choices in a way that's far more manageable for a small county, and a way that doesn't disenfranchise folks by limiting their ability to vote in person.
You brought this handout. It says the Voters Choice Act. It says we can learn more by going to voterschoice.sos.ca.gov. voterschoice.sos.ca.gov takes you to, I would assume, a web page where you can learn more information. In this handout
Absolutely.
basically summarizes what you said. There's kind of a vote by mail component, a ballot drop box component, and then these voter centers that you're talking about where you can vote in person, you can register to vote on the same day, all the way up through election day, drop off your ballot there, vote with accessible voting machines, it says, and get help with materials in multiple languages. How much of that is brand new and how much of that is stuff that we've been doing for a while? Is most of this a major change?
So most of that you could have done in our elections office, and only in our elections office.
Okay.
Polling places are really limited in their capacity for a couple of reasons. Technology is one part of it, but the other bit is an all volunteer group, and so having a professional set of by professional I mean paid,
right,
trained employees changes the dynamics some, and so we're going to be able to use these vote centers as essentially satellite offices for the main office. And so that's going to be a pretty drastic distinction. Well, all of these things were things that you were able to do when you came into our office. Those will now be things that you're going to be able to have done in Garberville, Arcata, and McKinleyville as well.
And who makes these changes? Is that like a thing that the office did? Is it something people voted on? What's the history of the act itself? Is
so
it
the
legislation?
The Voters' Choice Act is legislation that was signed by the governor at the time. I want to say it was Brown at the time. I don't know if Newsom signed it. And then it's something that local election officials, Registrar of Voters, have purview over it. I'm fortunate to have a partnership with my board of supervisors that's on board. They see the writing on the wall with some of this. This is the kind of thing that the Secretary of State and the legislature is pushing forward. In general, I think it's the future for California. It's one of those situations where we can either get on the bus or get hit by the bus. There's a lot of grant funding and funding that's being tied to the Voters' Choice Act. And so if you're a middling adopter, which is kind of where we're at, we're not really early adopters. We're on the main wave. There's a lot of benefits to coming on board now. And in Humboldt County, it's just absolutely necessary. Like I said, we have fewer and fewer ADA accessible facilities every election cycle. And we just don't have enough folks to crew 36 polling places.
It's 7 p.m. here on KZZH 96.7 FM Eureka. KZZH.accesshumboldt.net is where we are streaming online. We are talking to Juan Cervantes, the Humboldt County clerk and recorder. Just obviously a big push to get more people access to the vote. I feel like one of the big bits of noise that we're hearing is that it's too easy to vote, and that we're getting a lot of fraudulent votes and stuff. And I'm pretty sure if there were evidence to back that up, we would be hearing about it, and we are not. And yet, here I am asking you the question, is that something that happens in Humboldt County? Do we need to be worried about that? How worried about that are you?
We, people, I hear that complaint, and I hear another complaint a lot, which is why it takes so long to certify an election.
Mm-hmm.
And those kind of go hand in hand in that they're related. And that it takes us so long to certify an election because we investigate any kind of discrepancy that we find.
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime there's a potential for a duplicate voter, we're out there looking for them. We don't certify until we have certainty that everything matches and that it's one person, one vote, and that we're there. And so I just don't think the data doesn't show that there's a problem there. If the state puts out a report listing how many folks have been caught doing this, and we investigate them, and it's a handful every election cycle. And statistically, that doesn't meet the issue that would cause us to make it harder for folks that already find it difficult to vote. I just don't see that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because especially here in a rural area, it's already so difficult for folks to vote, and so many people don't because of that difficulty. And when we try to respond with so-called voter security mechanisms, we can frequently just take people that have every right to vote and make it that much more difficult for them to get to the polls. And we do it for reasons that are unsubstantiated. You say there's only just a handful of these every time. And even if there were, it would not be significant. It's just not enough. The margins are, even in a small area like Humboldt County, the margins are pretty substantial, right? To make it so that kind of thing just wouldn't even be a feasible way of stealing an election, even if you wanted to.
That's it.
Yeah. The implementation of the Voters' Choice Act, what does this look like in terms of the day-to-day for you? Are these voter centers already existing buildings? Do we have to do some kind of renovations, or what kind of process is there for that?
So there's a couple of pieces. Connectivity is one of them. We're wanting to make sure that they have certified secured connections so that we can network them into the rest of our office, into the Secretary of State's office in the way that our office is set up. ADA accessibility is another one. We're always kind of checking to make sure we're up to the current standard. So there might be some mitigation efforts, but all of these so far, if I'm looking at my current list, they're all facilities we already use. They're places like the Fortuna Veteran Memorial Building. They're places like the Arcata Community Center. They're big spots that we're already using.
What are the big barriers to implementing it? Like, what are the hurdles that you see?
Change is the biggest one. Changing and funding are the two. Funding's a little trickier. We're kind of doing something new, which is the change part. So there's a lot of uncertainty into how things work. Luckily, we're not early adopters, so we can look at how well this went in other places and learn from other folks' mistakes, which we're doing. But we're not quite sure. We don't know how efficiently we're going to be able to run the things the first time around. If we look at our neighbors that have implemented it, this costs a little more at first and then a lot less going forward.
Is that one of the big lessons you've learned from folks that have tried this ahead of time? Is just that there's kind of expenses you've got to assume.
Yeah, basically you're adapting to a new model, so it's hard to forecast what you're going to need in terms of those employees and poll workers. And then as you kind of get it dialed in, we're seeing cost savings in 20-30% compared to prior, which is meaningful for us.
What kind of scale are we talking about here in terms of costs? Like, what's the budget and what's the change?
And we're talking about $500,000-$600,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And that is primarily just to set up these buildings and to kind of shift over to this new system.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Are there things that are left out with this legislation? Like what do you wish we could have seen included?
I mean, a stronger rural voice. I'm all for giving people more options, more days, but I can assure you people are going to be very bored for like 8 of those days if they're at the 11-day vote center. We just don't have we don't have the foot traffic. And so I think it's too many days. I think 4 is the sweet spot in Humboldt County. Give us a weekend in addition to that Monday and Tuesday. And I think folks have enough time to make it out there, but otherwise you're going to have many days in which only one person goes to one of those 11-day vote centers. And that's tough. That's tough on morale, and it's tough from a cost-effective perspective. Those are dollars that could go into outreach or going into other ways to bring out the vote. And so that's one area. I wish they could give us the option to have fewer days at some of our places.
Are there other areas that you wish that they'd made bigger changes in terms of like our particular needs here within the region, or maybe just like more broadly, just nationwide?
Publicly funded elections would be great. Having the state pay for our elections would be incredible.
Let's get an election holiday going while we're
absolutely. But yeah, just getting more money in elections is key. If you look at a lot of our budgets, they haven't changed over the years, but I could assure you the legislation has put more requirements on us. Most election offices are run on shoestring budgets for the work that we do. And so getting more funding is dire. And I say this going into a budget cycle where we're going to be doing presentations, but we live in a future that our offices haven't evolved towards, and to get there in a way that could eventually be far more efficient. I think it's a worthwhile investment to invest in democracy.
Do you feel like legislators hear that? Are they sympathetic to this, or is the budget like something that you feel like has to be fought unnecessarily to sustain?
The budget's kind of one of those places where you can see where representative values is at, right? The recall election was paid for by the state. Right. COVID had some monies that the state paid for, but for the most part, the state doesn't give us a dime for the elections we're running here in Humboldt County, even when the governor is on the ballot. Locally, I think our board of supervisors sees it. I think they realize that this is important, and I hope that's reflected on the budget they approve here in in the next month or so, but it's important. It's critical. It's you see it across the state, is that you have these folks that just love the process, and so we make it work, and we often make it work by subsidizing it with our lifeblood. I tend to work 60, 70, 80-hour days, when we're getting, or not days, I'm sorry, weeks, when we're getting close to an election, and a lot of that's not compensated. And it's because the work needs to get done. And I fear that if we keep it up, it's going to break.
Yeah. Who are some of the folks around you that make a real difference, like in your office?
All of them. Yeah. Everyone in my office. I have an amazing staff. Those are the people I'm talking about. Those are the folks that subsidize your democracy.
Yeah.
The county workers, AFSCME employees, they're making sacrifices. They're going above and beyond. And as much as I tell them not to work off the clock, I know they're doing it, because there's no way we could afford to do the kind of work that we do. But yeah, no, it's everyone in my office.
Where would we see these people? What kind of work do they do? Like, for folks that just don't know anything about your office.
All right. So on the Clerk Recorder side, and I mentioned them because they're over in our office too.
Yeah.
During election season, they're coming over to the office and opening ballots and processing things, and they're in the weeds with us. It's one department, two offices, one department, really. And then so I've got my document examiners, my fiscal officer, my fiscal assistant, my senior document examiners. I've got on the election side, my election specialists, my administrative analysts. Currently, I don't have a manager in either office, and so that's another place. I'm hoping the Board of Supervisors is kind to my budget, so that I'm able to hire those folks and keep things going.
Never enough administrators, it seems, when it comes time to have an election. I feel like it's
for
paperwork
sure.
And
yeah, it's a lot of coordination, a lot of balls in the air, and making sure they all get caught. And with an office like that, and a modern office, we're not administratively heavy. Like I said, I've got one manager on each side, and everybody else is line staff or support staff. If oftentimes I have employees that are waiting for me to go over there and kind of work with what's going on so that they could get going. And so getting a manager in place that can do some of that coordination is going to just make us so much more efficient.
How do you think we've done just countywide in our elections up until this point?
What do you mean?
Like, how do you feel we've done? Like, do you when you came in, do you feel like things were going great? Do you feel like things could be better? Do you feel like there's room for improvement? I
think we have a unique reputation in the state, in that our county elections are well regarded by a large number of people in the county. I think that's not something you see anywhere else in the state, to have the kind of trust in the security and process that we have. I think we're utterly solid there. I can't see any room for improvement. It's gold standard. I think our voter turnout was less than 50% the last election, and I think that's criminal. I don't fault our office or anybody that worked before me. You do with what you can with what you have, but that's a clear problem to me. That's something's going on there that's massively broken. If we saw that occur in other nations, we would say something about it. We would call into question their elections, and so I think it's something that merits a lot of work and merits us putting our values to work in how we allocate our time and resources. And so I think that's a place that we could do better.
How do you study that problem?
I think we look at, there's a couple of places. I mean, research is one of them. I'm a bit of a nerd, and so I tend to see.
You have a Jet Propulsion Laboratory shirt on, and I adore it. I'm jealous.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a nerd, so
a bit.
I like looking at where the research is at, seeing what other counties are doing, and more importantly, when it comes to this issue, the key is going out to where people are at. And so I'm never going to be an expert on homelessness. I'm never going to be an expert on what's going on in the Black community in Humboldt or the Hmong community or students anymore. I'm a little old, so I don't know what that lived experience is like, and I don't know what's going on that's keeping them from voting. But we have a lot of really incredible people in Humboldt County in those spaces, and I think working with them, putting time towards that work, and doing so in a way that means something, that produces outcomes that are rewarding. I think that's how we get there.
It's hard to know if it's apathy or access or potentially a combination of both.
Those are related.
Yeah, they would have to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a bit naive, and I think that a lot of those barriers are ones that we could overcome. I don't think anybody's against democracy. I think oftentimes either they have too much on their plate because they're working too hard for too little, or because they don't know what's going on and we haven't done a good enough job of showing them. We haven't broken things down into normal speak. We get caught up in jargon.
Mm-hmm.
We get in these silos of talking to fellow bureaucrats, and none of it makes sense to anybody out, and we lose touch with how to communicate with people.
Yeah, I think especially when we're really far apart and we're spread real far apart, and the only time we see each other is in traffic where we typically won't get along.
Absolutely.
We're standing in line. How do people get in touch with you if they want to reach out and contact you? Is there a good way to
I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to. It's just the kind of official I am. My email address is JP Cervantes, spelled CER, V as in Victor, ANTES, at co.humboldt.ca.us.
That's a great way to get in touch with you. They can also just look for your office. I'm pretty sure they can find that online in all these different ways.
Easy to Google all of a sudden. Never was before, but now Juan Pablo Cervantes and Humboldt will pop me right up.
Comes right up. That's what happens when you win an election. Just one last question here. We asked you like what you say to people that don't have any interest in politics right now. So now the question is, what do you tell people that are just really excited to get involved? Like, how do they get involved? Where would you tell them to get involved?
Well,
what do they do?
So oftentimes I get this question a lot from folks that are passionate, and often I ask them what they're passionate about specifically. Some folks are just interested in all of it, and it's easy enough to just plug them into League of Women Voters if they want to be into the democracy type of stuff. But if there's a particular niche they want to see changes in, start showing up to meetings, do a little research. If you're really wanting responsible transportation to be a thing, start going to planning meetings and safety meetings. If you want more parks, go to those. Call our office and ask us who they can vote for, and we'll give them a long list of elected officials that are responsive for them.
A lot of people running seemingly all the time, I feel like.
Yeah. A lot of school boards, special districts, fire protection districts. We just had a special election here in March. We have a new fire protection district in Salmon Creek. Yeah, so there's many ways. So if you're wanting to get involved, do a little research, do some Googling in the area that you want to be involved in. And if that becomes a little overwhelming, give our office a call and we could point you towards different offices that you could either run for or show up to meetings and talk to them about public comment. And hopefully they will be more receptive than my board of trustees was in community college.
Juan, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. This has been the Civic Union, a collaboration between Access Humboldt and the Department of Communication Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, uniting the people of the county with their representative government and community helpers. Again, I want to thank our guest, Juan Cervantes, the county clerk and recorder for Humboldt County. Also, thanks to Nate for holding down the fort while I try to get here on time, for booking our guests and doing all the great work to make it sound good here in the studio. We will be back Monday, June 5th here on the Civic Union. Up next is one of my favorite shows here on KZZH, where you can listen to certified animal behaviorist Charlotte Peltz give you tips, tricks, and tools to make it work with that roommate who eats your slippers. It's living with your dog right here on KZZH.
And tonight's guest is Dr. Judy Morgan.
Dr. Judy Morgan is the guest tonight. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for listening. Stay united.